I've been asked today to talk to you about how technology is changing our cities. This is a big topic, once over, glossy, skimming the surface takes about 2 hours. So I'm going to talk quickly and leave out every other idea. And by the way, it isn't technology that's changing our cities. Technology isn't a thing. It doesn't have free will. It doesn't change things. It changes us, and then we change our cities. And if you don't believe these are real effects, look to your left and your right at how many of you are on little screens doing something. And I'm sure that's taking detailed notes of everything I'm saying. But the reality is, it changes us. You look at the smartphone, there are 7.5 billion people in the world, give or take. There are 6 billion cell phones registered and operating. 30% of those are smartphones, and that number is going to double in the next year or two, which means a significant percentage of the population of the planet is all connected to each other. That typical barriers of communications and storytelling, such as language, are disappearing. And you can say, well, that's, pretty junky translation. The answer is, well, it's actually brilliant translation if you've been locked out of most of the literature of the world because you don't happen to speak a language that most of the literature of the world is published in. And literature means ideas and it means concepts. The way cities will change will be along improving our quality of life if we're lucky and we pay attention. Cities start out being designed, and they're designed with some plan. I'm going to draw for you because PowerPoint is evil. And so some cities are radial. You put something important in the middle, and you radiate out from that important thing, the seat of power, something interesting. Some are grids. You put together a grid, and you say, well, that's easy. And if you're not too creative, it's Avenue A, B, C, and D, and Street 1 through X. Or you say, well, that's nice, but we actually need a sanctuary in the middle. So you get New York City with a Central Park, which makes it livable and provides light and does things like that. Or you get this. You get little villages and towns which start growing and keep growing and keep growing until you call it Los Angeles. And, you have that. So cities, sometimes they're designed, sometimes there's intentionality to it. And by the way, there's radial design, there's grid design, there's it just happened, kind of colony growth, and there's bad design. And bad is generally the most prominent, or so it seems, especially when you live in a city that was designed with what was a sensible idea 100 or 150 years ago, and is actually less sensible now. The effects of how technology impacts us relative to the design of cities are often not obvious. The notion of the smartphone was not obvious, and the impact that it had and how it changed people's lives. And incidentally, the conventional wisdom was this is mature technology, cellular technology, don't invest there, there's nothing new, it's just building out infrastructure, until Apple effectively turned it upside down. And now if you're not competing with the ideas of Apple Computer, witness the smartphone, etc., which incidentally, they had decades earlier with the Newton, which didn't work because a whole bunch of technologies, such as little and tiny, such as a human interface that worked, such as it networked and wireless ubiquity. So the new ideas that will change cities are generally not new technologies, but it's new ideas that apply generally one or more existing technologies together. And these have both intentional and unintentional consequences as they move forward. Transportation is a big one. Why? Because most cities are designed around transportation. You can believe it or not, but all of these designs are dependent on the ability to move people. Why? Cities have large numbers of people, and for them to function, you have to efficiently move those people around. Disruptive ideas enabled by technology like the smartphone, such as Uber, are causing radical rethinking for a lot of cities of how they work. It used to be there was a dialogue about, is it personal transportation or is it public transportation? And cities were chided for getting rid of public transportation in favor of personal. Those were simplistic ideas that were at a moment in time. That moment is rapidly passing, where the notion of how we reinvent cities due to technology, it's not just the Ubers, but self-driving cars. Self-driving cars, which seems like, if you casually look at it, an amusing feature, like a better version of cruise control. I mean, these ideas have been around since the 30s. It is not an idea that is new to have self-driving cars. What's new is we have a confluence of technologies which make it actually possible to do affordably. And whether that's ubiquitous wireless communication, whether it's companies like Google who've mapped the entire Earth and the cities with a high degree of accuracy, whether it's car-to-car communications rather than people-to-other network communications, and whether it's the computational power, not just in the vehicle, but in the network the vehicles are more or less continuously connected to, that take ideas from, gee, that would be nice in the far distant future, to, in 5 years, we can have a meaningful impact, in 15 years, significant impacts. The concept of self-driving cars means, first of all, you recapture enormous amounts of wasted real estate. If you designed a parking garage, for example, that doesn't have to have people in it, so the ceilings are this high, and you don't allow spaces for the doors to open because the cars park themselves in, and you can stack them 5 levels deep because algorithmically they can reorganize themselves and get in and out, especially if they understand your pattern of life. So when you might need your car, either because you said you would or not, it's rearranging it. All of a sudden, you get back half of the real estate, or 2/3 of the real estate, which is currently devoted to cars and parking. We lose in the United States in traffic fatalities 32,000, 33,000 people a year. Incidentally, we lose over 100,000 a year in acquired hospital infections. I guess the message is, if you're in a car crash, don't let them take you to a hospital. But nonetheless, these are real numbers. Those numbers with self-driving cars will collapse. Yes, there will be some spectacular accidents when they all decide to turn left one afternoon, but at the same time, the impact on saving people's lives and personal safety will be enormous. Potentially, when we have saturation of these vehicles, you could have 1/4, 1/10 the number of fatalities. And we only talk about fatalities, not the lives that are ruined by serious injury, and these numbers collapse. Safety of cities goes up. Cameras, whether it's cameras that are looking at cities, you look at the effect in cities such as London, which started using it for law enforcement very early on. Profound effects, a citizen self-reporting. You see a fire before an alarm does, and you call it in. You see a crime before it calls it in. The chilling effects of knowing if you do something bad, someone will probably have it on camera, and it will be traceable to you. 911, mobile 911. Every one of your cell phones is tracking where you are all the time. And by the way, that's remembered forever, which we have to think about a little. But, you hit 911 on your phone, and because of legislation, within 100 feet or so, we know where you are and can get emergency support to you at that moment and space. So changing cities' quality of life. The caveat here, and it's a big one, is responsibility. Because do you all like the idea that we know where you are? We, with the larger we, our cities know where we are every moment of every day and have been, and it's correlatable with other things. The idea that we have intelligent traffic management and traffic lights, get rid of those pesky drivers, have cars that don't run red lights and do a collection of things like that, have a new definition of work based upon flex time so that you cut the transit in half, the time to get from one place to another. And by the way, if there's an emergency in a city, you can actually intelligently evacuate everybody quickly and efficiently, should you need to do that, and get emergency vehicles quickly where they're needed, post-recovery and such. Air pollution. You have cars which are not sitting there for long periods of time. Air pollution drops. It could be dropping as much as 75%, especially because future generations of cars will be using either zero emission, if you have a battery-powered car, the only emissions are what it took to manufacture the car, and the source. So if the source is burning hydrocarbon fuels, you have the same emissions, you've just put them somewhere else, but they're not concentrated within the city. Good for the city, not so good for somewhere else if you happen to be there. Or solar or renewable, where you in fact don't have emissions except what went into manufacturing these things. These effects are not obvious. Noise pollution in big cities is a big problem. It drives up people's stress levels, it lowers quality of life. When you have these better organized traffic flows and management, you do that. You start designing cities so that you have pedestrian thoroughfares and places for gathering and social assembly. We used to have the town square. That was replaced. We used to have the hearth in the home. The hearth was replaced by television in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which has then been replaced by what a lot of you are doing. Looking down in your hand, you now have a mobile hearth, which is connecting you to communities of people and allowing you to share ideas. I grew up sitting around the television listening to Walter Cronkite tell me what the world was and what to expect the future should be. Well, now the dialogue is extended, and it's extended not just from the cities, but globally. So the concept of national boundaries, language boundaries, nationalism and such are all being rethought. The exciting thing when you look at this and you say, well, how can we allow people to track people's behaviors? Well, responsible use of tracking behaviors means traffic moves better, which means rush hour isn't as bad, which means you can get a restaurant. E-commerce in mobile devices, just starting to happen now, safer, more secure things, as well as understanding your patterns of life, which means should you opt in? Important question. We must have this so that you have the option of opting in or not. Big deal. Can actually let you know what kind of restaurant you like that's nearby and when it's available, get you there on time, get you back. Self-driving cars and the technology supporting them are the first ideas that are letting us fundamentally rethink the design of cities and therefore the design of ourselves. And whether that's the safety of our families, education, fundamentally changing today, looking at education, MOOCs, the tendency to sort of say, well, what lends itself to distance learning and online learning? And now it's portable. By the way, in the self-driving car, you're doing that while you're in the car. So instead of a 2-hour commute, you end up with an hour commute, and that hour is spent doing work, or taking classes, or talking to your friends and family, or sharing special moments. Cities need to be generous about sharing their data. Those data are critical to enable this. And whether, as we heard earlier, it has to do with hiring trends, employment, et cetera, whether it has to do with movement of traffic, whether it's behaviors, whether it's crime statistics, doesn't matter what it is. Those data, when published, and published freely, rather than sweetheart deals with individual outputs, enable clever, inventive people to design fundamentally different experiences for all of us. And again, it's about quality of life. So don't be stingy with the data. However, there are unintended consequences of all new technologies, and we have to be free with the data, use it to enable new ideas, but be very cognizant of personal security and privacy and the things which has made this nation great, which can be in jeopardy from this, having to do with personal freedoms and liberties. And unattended consequences, it generally takes time to figure out what the impact of any of these new technologies are, which means once we do something that enables a new path and direction, we actually have to pay attention to what's really happening rather than what we thought is happening. And similar to the Silicon Valley or Silicon Beach or Silicon Alley mentality, which is fail fast, rapid prototyping, experimentation, we don't think about urban design in terms of failing fast and rapid prototyping. However, with technology, it gives us a different way to think about these designs. In summary, if we're sensible and thoughtful and we pay attention, and we create infrastructures, data resources, rules and regulations which actually encourage clever, talented next generations of people, our kids, others, they have the ability and the power to, one, take the existing cities we have. How many of you live in cities? Large percentage of you. How many of you thought it was better 20 years ago? Okay, we tend to get things move in the direction of chaos. The commuting time is longer, traffic is more difficult. Now, if you're in a city that has less crime now or urban renewal, that might feel a lot better. If you're in a city where it used to take you 15 minutes to get to work and now takes you 2 hours to get to work, and keep in mind, cities are not just cities, but it's the surrounding areas and commuting and the traffic flow back and forth between all of those. My commuting time in Los Angeles is double what it was when I moved there 25 years ago to be able to work. The idea that you can move back in time for the things that are desirable to have a higher quality of life, more time with your family, more productivity. This lost productivity is an enormous tax on our society and culture. The time you spent non-productively in cars, polluting the air, wasting non-renewable resources, and killing people is actually easy to think that you might devote to something a little more productive, and these technologies give us the ability to recapture that. So we can help redesign a city, redesign the quality of life in cities, bring families together, fix education. There's a bunch of things that will not be done but are enabled by these. However, I would ask you to think about what in the creative design minds of the future, the new cities which will be appearing and are appearing all over our planet, not to mention our country, what they could look like when for the first time you're not designing around transportation of vehicles, but you're designing around personal empowerment. You're designing about quality of life where daylight, sunshine, green places for kids to play, a whole bunch of things which became subsidiary due to the needs of urban traffic mobility, whether public, private, et cetera, all of a sudden come to the fore again. I think it's a very exciting time. That some of you sitting in this room will be the ones that enable it, or if not, your kids will. We need not to be afraid of technology, but we need to be cautious about its intelligent application, and we need to lean forward. As cities and leadership of cities, leaning forward means that some of these miracles can in fact happen decades earlier than they would if left to the normal course of events. Thank you.